Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University. And welcome to vlog 279, a student's view of the oral examination. And my goodness me, I have a guest. I have a guest in this vlog, and this is so exciting because the nature of COVID is you've had to put up with me alone for far too long, and that's just so dull. So I have a person of excitement and energy that is joining us today from a very, very late night Manchester to a very, very early Adelaide. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amy Healey. Now, Amy is spectacular, as you can see, what a human, but she's just passed her PhD without corrections. So she is a unicorn. And she's just finished her oral examination. So, and can I say, from the legendary University of Central Lancashire, hello to everyone at Central Lancs, long live the North, power to you, wonderful university. And therefore, at the end of this oral examination trilogy, I thought it was appropriate that we'd engage with the student perspective. And of course, this is incredibly fresh for Amy in many ways, and we'll talk about your wonderful supervisor probably in a sec, Amy, but to actually work out what occurred, what happened through the oral exam from a student's perspective. So I'm so excited to welcome Amy to this vlog series. You are a wonderful human. And can I say, from a very, very late night, long day, and I think the Manchester International Festival. So hi, Amy.
Hello, how are you getting on?
Oh, fantastic. Better for seeing you. And just so you can tell everybody, what time is it in Manchester at the moment?
It's 10:30 at the moment, so it's not too late yet, but it has been quite the long day at the festival today. So yeah, a little bit tired, but definitely excited to talk to everybody.
Oh, and look, we're so thrilled. And we probably should tell people too, shouldn't we, Amy, that I was actually your oral examiner, your external examiner. So can you imagine, you think you're having a bad time, friends around the world. Imagine me being the external examiner. So for Amy, let's find a strategy, and hopefully this is great for Amy too, because I'd love her to write this up, to actually think about what did happen between the thesis itself and the oral examination. So look, Amy, we'll start with you. And look, it's a magnificent thesis. Could you just tell us about the thesis and the research that you did?
Oh, yeah, well, that's very kind words. So my thesis was titled The National Football Museum as a Cultural Institution. So I looked at the Football Museum, which is in Manchester, UK, to kind of think more broadly about class inside the cultural industries, about how the idea of culture has been developed within kind of specific social norms and by particular people, and how that has fed through into cultural policy, and that still impacts upon what gets funded and what doesn't to this day.
See, that's remarkable to me. And also it was funded research too, wasn't it? Actually, which is very rare in the United Kingdom, very common in Australia that there are national scholarships, but you actually gained a hyper competitive scholarship, didn't you?
Yeah, so it was funded through the Collaborative Doctoral Partnership Scheme, which is a scheme that's to bridge the gap between kind of the cultural sector and the university sector. So there's a few PhDs out there who are doing stuff between like museums and galleries and different sorts of places and universities. Hopefully that means that there's a little bit more dialogue between those two kind of separate institutions going forward.
What a truly brilliant initiative, and you're getting a sense about how brilliant this woman is. So I just wanted to ask you, and I never asked you this question. In fact, I didn't ask you in the oral exam either. Did COVID impact on your research at all? It'll probably be quite common that in oral exams we will ask questions about COVID, but did that have an impact on your data collection, your interpretation, the logistics of doing a PhD?
It was kind of a mixed bag, really, and in some ways there was a lot of uncertainty, obviously, that kind of impacted, I suppose, on like how you're feeling about being able to concentrate with doing it. But at the same time, I got very, very lucky in that being in my third year, I did get an extension that was funded as part of that collaborative doctoral partnership, which I think is really important, because some of the people who are in their first and second and going into their third years now, they've been impacted, but they're not getting that same kind of level of support and level of funding. So actually having that kind of financial support was a massive help during that period of uncertainty. And that did really help. And in some ways, actually being at home without any distractions, without any kind of fear of missing out, I think that gave me a little bit of an advantage to kind of like actually get on with my writing and get it done. But I do actually think there's probably something to be said about where you were along your PhD journey when COVID and the pandemic hit, as to the effect of that. And luckily for me, a lot of that primary research had already been done and already collected. So I was in a good place to write up. But that hasn't actually been the case, I don't think, for a lot of other funded students.
Oh, this is huge. And look, that's the narrative of COVID, I think, where we're seeing some students actually increased in speed and were able to do more in-depth, complex work, particularly in terms of interpretation. So now your thesis is making a lot more sense to me in terms of the complexity, the weight of the interpretation, and the crew that have had their data collection interrupted. I know it's particularly an issue in allied health, but I'd also imagine in some areas of urban regional development and creative industries as well. So therefore, I'm going to ask the tough question. And again, I'm fascinated in the answer here, how you manage the gap between the submission of your thesis and how we conducted the oral examination. Now, from my perspective, of course, you didn't know me at all. From my perspective, that gap seemed quite long. So in other words, I agreed to be your examiner and I believed you were submitting, and yet it was a fair whack of time before the oral exam was held. Is that your experience of what occurred?
You know what, it didn't feel that way at all. And I think the reason was that it wasn't until a couple of weeks after I submitted, maybe 5 weeks, until I even got the email from the grad school to say that it had been passed on. And because of that, it felt like you were waiting for that email before I was then waiting for my examiners. So it kind of felt like it was really long and then very, very short after that. I feel like you and my other examiner, Sean, were very quick actually. So yeah, hello Sean. Yeah, it was a long and a short kind of gap in between. And I think I was ready to give myself a break. I think by the time I submitted, because of the pandemic, I think I'd not really given myself any sort of real break or holiday because we've had nowhere to go. So it had been like quite a long slog. It got to the end of submitting it and it felt like have a real break away from it. So I tried to not even go on my laptop. I went outside again, started watching The Sopranos, just tried to do things that were kind of like taking you away and distracting myself from actually thinking about my thesis. And I think in the end, that was really helpful to have that time away.
Look, I tell you what, I think that's a crucial bit of advice for people, because my perspective as the external examiner is you appeared incredibly fresh when you conducted that oral exam. So that was the amazing bit for me, is I thought, oh, wow, I was worried about you because obviously COVID, what appeared to me a long period of time. So I was worried about your stress level and it was important to manage that in the oral exam. But you appeared fresh as a daisy. It was like sort of this magnificent goth queen suddenly entered my life. It was absolutely amazing. But so the freshness actually came from you going, you know what, I'm going to watch The Sopranos. I'm going to get some sun on my face in Manchester, which is always a challenge, and try and actually get a bit of life back into me. So is that something you'd advise for other people too? Just actually step away?
Yeah, absolutely. I do that's one of the things I've learned from the entire PhD process is the importance of thinking about things and sleeping on things and kind of having more of a kind of stepping away from something gives you that time to actually think things through in your head. And it might be that it doesn't feel like you're making progress because you're not getting words on the page, when actually that's a really, really vital part of the learning process and something that you can't really rush. And I think when it came to the thesis, for the exam, I was trying to have that same sort of advice to myself, which is that actually getting that break and having that those long lie-ins and all of those different things were really helpful in making sure that I could go back to it with a fresh pair of eyes.
And you certainly had that. I often refer to that, Amy, as thinking time. I think the nature of the contemporary university system, meetings, talk, all this nonsense, it fills up the time to stop people thinking. And what you've just clarified there is the importance of PhD students in constructing overtly and being aware of time. Now, I'm going to ask the emotional question now, because obviously the oral exam, and we'll talk about your level of stress, and you might want to talk about it in this answer too, but how did you emotionally prepare for an oral exam? Because obviously you only do them really once in a lifetime. You've got no real idea what it's going to be like. So you step into it not knowing. So how did you emotionally prepare for something that you didn't know what was going to happen?
Oh, well, it was difficult to say how did I like manage it, because it just kind of had to happen. Time doesn't stand still, so some of it was just that it happened. And I have myself a little bit of a motto, which I hope takes me through, which is that if I want to panic about something, I can do that tomorrow. And I keep saying that to myself again and again. And it's a bit like one of those pubs that think they're a bit wacky and has a sign outside saying free beer tomorrow, and then tomorrow is always the next day. And I think that has actually seen me through the PhD by being like, right now, it's not helpful to panic about something, but if I need to panic tomorrow, I'll panic tomorrow. And that has helped me, I think, to kind of like reel it in a bit and try and like not freak out about what's going to happen. There was obviously moments where it kind of did feel a bit overwhelming, and I started to have those kind of like thoughts of like, oh no, what if this happens? What if this happens? But I think trying to kind of like just check myself, and because I was enjoying having a bit of a break, I think that did help as well, because it was like, I'll distract myself with more Sopranos.
This is fantastic. Absolutely. And how were you coming into the experience of the relationship with the examiners too, Amy? I mean, how did you worry about that? You obviously knew who the examiners were. So were you calm with that? Did that worry you? Did you get fixated on who was coming in, or you just went, there 2 people, we'll just go through the process and see what happens? Did the identity worry you at all?
Not a fantastic amount, and I think maybe some of that is that you were my examiner and I have watched your videos, so I think that actually was helpful in a way, in that like I knew how you would maybe talk on them, and just even little things like that. And I think a lot of the I feel like I had good examiners in both you and Sean, my other examiner, and it didn't worry me because I'd read your work, and I think it spoke to what I was doing as well. And so I actually think having examiners that I had chosen myself and that I was very keen to have on board, I think that did make me feel a little bit better, because it was people that I felt would maybe get what I was doing. I think that was one of my worries, is that what I was doing might have just not been something that like whoever my examiners would just get. Whereas because I'd chosen my examiners myself, which I know not every student is lucky enough to kind of be able to do. No, at all. And I think even when you're talking about like COVID and how that affected things, I actually think being able to conduct them online opens up the world a little bit to have the examiners for you that you'd like. So I actually think I was quite. That didn't make me panic.
But I think that's an interesting strategy, even if you don't choose them. And of course, most systems don't allow that. But obviously, you and I had never met at all. But if you at least have a sense of them as a person, I think that's brilliant advice, Amy. So how they do speak, their priorities, what they look like. So suddenly these people aren't coming on a screen. You go, is that random, right? So actually just being comfortable with the visage, being comfortable with the voice. In your case, you were managing an accent. So going, this strange accent is going to be coming at you, and being comfortable with that. I think that's great advice. That we've just handled the emotions to it. Can we talk about how you prepared for your thesis in some ways? So how did you read and engage with the thesis? So you took a break, you watched The Sopranos, that's fantastic. But then when the time came just before, I'd imagine, the oral exam, you had to engage with the text of the thesis. How did you engage with it, and how did you prepare the thesis that you brought into the exam room?
One thing I didn't want to do was come in with an annotated thesis that had lots of notes in that I was going to get myself stumbling over a little bit. So I printed off a copy that was just to have a straight copy. I didn't have any of those things on. And actually, I'm a big fan of being read out loud to. So I got my computer to read my thesis to me a few times. I think that's kind of a way that I learn quite well. And I think knowing that that was one of my styles of how I like to engage with things. And I found like even better software that read it more like a human, and actually having that read to me. And then I would read it aloud as well. And that was one way that I thought going back to it. And in some ways, I read over some little bits and I mean, there was definitely pages where I wanted to put my head in my hands because I thought, why have I done this? But there was also some pages where I actually thought, oh, this isn't as bad as I remember. Like, if I'd have read this, I think this would have been okay. So I think actually having the break was good for reading the thesis, but then also kind of trying to come to it and imagining it from the point of view of somebody who is engaging with that for the first time, and seeing how trying to identify those areas where exactly the argument is developing and what are the key kind of points from those ways. I think that was the way I tried to kind of engage with the thesis.
You've just changed my life there, just so you know. What you've done theoretically, and you probably know this, Amy, is that you've defamiliarized your relationship with the text. So because you got the computer to read it to you in a relatively human voice, sadly, it probably wasn't a Manchester accent, for which I'd apologize, but it sounds less like sort of like Red Dwarf, which is a good thing. But so you've actually defamiliarized your relationship with the text. It's multimodal. So you're actually engaging with the material in a different way, activates a different series of memories for yourself, and you think about it in a different way. I had never thought of doing that. So you have said something today which will change how people prepare for oral exams. That is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So you've got a different relationship with your research before you go in to the oral exam itself. That's just magnificent. The next question, and again, I don't know the answer to this, and you can talk about your wonderful supervisor. Should say a big hello to John. Hi, John. Amazing human being, amazing human being, amazing scholar, transformed sport and cultural studies, amazing human being. But did you do a mock oral examination? Did you actually go through a mock, Amy, or no?
No, I didn't. My supervisor offered, John, again, like you said, the most amazing man in the world. He offered to go through a mock with me. But he did give me the caveat that it's not always the best option for some students, because there's always the risk that if you do badly in the mock, it kind of throws you off your groove a little bit. But also, if you do well in the mock, it can mean that when you're in the real setting, if it doesn't go quite as well, you start to then have the panic of, oh, this isn't going as well as my mock, and that can throw you off as well. So I kind of thought in the moment that wasn't the right option for me. I think that might have led to a little bit more panic, but I do see how that is the right option for some students, definitely.
I think that's a great point. And again, I hadn't thought of that either. It could lead to false confidence, like I'm going to do well, or if the mock goes badly, and invariably they do, by the way, the mocks often are, okay, well, that happened. Now, this is the answer. You really need to reframe your answer to that. So it can create panic. At its best, you might know, I actually recorded, did the plural there. My multiple personalities and I recorded a vlog that was a mock exam. That's the part of the trilogy of this little session. And so that vlog actually presents a series of questions for students to go through. So maybe that calm, you can pause the video, have a go, have a think. That might be an option for people to manage the critique that you've said there. But I mean, that's a great point. Be aware of that issue with the mock. So I just want to move now to the exam itself, because it was quite early morning for you and everyone, Central Lancs was very kind to me. It was in my sort of early evening, and it meant it was your reasonably early morning. And so could you tell us about that morning, I can't even imagine the capacity or the emotions that you're feeling the hour before as you watch the time. You've got to get yourself up, you've got to get your face on. It's an oral examination that's via Zoom, via Teams. So could you tell us about that morning and how you managed that degree of stress?
Yeah, so luckily for me, in some ways it was good it was in the morning, because I am a night owl, so it actually did mean that I wasn't awake for that long before the exam. That's a little secret. So I probably did only get up about 45 minutes before I went into my exam, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I feel like it worked.
Oh, look at, I'm absolutely stunned, because you looked really calm. I was going, this woman's done 5 hours of yoga before we're going in here. And actually, Yeah.
No,
Ooh.
it was just a lot of hours of sleep, really. Yeah, I think in some ways, I think it was in the afternoon, I would have got myself really in my head, but because it was like quite early, it worked well for me. And I think there was something to be said about it being from home and doing it online, in that I could kind of do that. And I kind of gave myself enough time that I would have a good like 10-15 minutes of like thinking things through, but I also didn't give myself enough time to have a mad panic about it.
And of course, that's the weird thing about running it with an Australian examiner, because it had to be really in the morning. Whereas when I was in the UK, when we were running oral exams, of course, mostly you're on a train from London to Manchester, from Eastbourne to London, from Brighton up to Leeds. And so they're obviously, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so people can get up to the north or down to the south. So invariably with an external travelling by train, they're in the afternoon. So that's something for us to think about in terms of reducing the stress on students, bringing it forward in the day. That's absolutely brilliant. But my next...
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah, potentially. Well, I think you've just made the argument that I think we all need to really think about there. And of course, the other next point is you had another unusual thing that was COVID related. Most British examinations are held with an external that's within Britain. Now, obviously, I'm pretty well a good proxy for that because I was a prof for 10 years in the UK, but I'm in Australia. So this oral exam was conducted via Teams. Now, we're obviously having this remarkable conversation now, this time by Zoom, but how did the screen-based oral exam change your experience, do you think? Was it harder or easier?
Again, it was a bit of a mixed bag, I think. It was strange being inside your own house when you were doing it, and knowing that, like, I suppose it's with everybody who's been working from home, not having that transition between kind of a workplace and a home. A home is kind of a bit of a funny one to get your head around. And I think in some ways it made it easier in that, like, I'm seeing my familiar, like my house on one side of me and one side of me. It's only when I'm looking forward is it that's like this is the exam. So it was a little bit confusing in that way. But I kind of thought it's not something I've put a great deal of time to thinking, because it was one of those things where like this is what it is and this is how it's going to be. And it did just kind of think whichever way it's going to be, it's still going to happen, and I want to do the best out of it. So it was one of those ones where I was thinking there's pros and cons to doing it both ways. But if this is like potentially even the future, one of the big pros was that I managed to get you, the examiner I wanted, from Australia, and we could do that, and we didn't have those barriers in place that a 24-hour plane journey and all of those things. And so I felt quite lucky that I got to do it online, because it meant I got to have the examiner that I wanted to speak to. So
look, it's remarkable. And can I say, firstly, I need to also comment, like, I'm in a very dull, boring beige environment, for which I apologise, my home office. You look like Nigella Lawson. Can I just put that out? You have the best kitchen I have ever seen with any human.
Well, I'm actually staying at my mum and dad's house at the moment, so that's going to be one for Karen. I will go and compliment her in a little while.
Could you just tell Karen it is the most magnificent kitchen I have ever seen? She needs her own television program. The next question, again, is an interesting one, Amy, and I don't know the answer to it. It's about the surprises. This will really help students. So you are very dispassionate. You're brilliant. So this is what it is. It is what it is. Deal with it. Deal with the reality that's in front of you. Fantastic Northern English attitude. Can I say, this is it? Don't pretty it up. Just deal with it, right? Just plow on through, rock and roll. But I wonder, with the expectations you had, if anything through the oral exam that lasted about an hour and a half, I think, the actual questioning bit of it. Were there any surprises for you? Was there anything that, looking back on it, went, gee, that was weird? This is important. This will help people, Amy.
What I was quite surprised about was I thought it was going to be incredibly formal, and I thought as examiners you would both be very stony faced, and it would be more kind of like an interview of like, why have you done this, and then answering those questions in that way. And I was actually like very like encouraged, I think, that wasn't the case at all, and I felt like I had that kind of some feedback, sort of, even if all of that was only through the face. And I think that put me at ease instantly, and I did think that it was going to be a lot more of a kind of a formal, this is how this is going to happen sort of interaction, but it wasn't, and it really was a lot less intimidating than I thought. And I was also a bit surprised. I've always absolutely rolled my eyes into the back of my head when people have been like, oh, I enjoyed my examination, and I'm just like, no, you didn't. Turns out it is quite enjoyable. So who knew? Like, I actually did really enjoy it, which again, so people aren't lying, that is the truth.
Look, that'll help people enormously. And can I say it will also, I hope, help examiners, because as you know, in Australia, we're trying to convince the universities to move to an oral examination. And I think it's important that we train our examiners well. So this, you know, an oral exam exists for particular reasons, one of which is research integrity. So we need the student relaxed so that they give their best oral examination. So it's not about, you know, you've been charged with murder and we're about to put you in jail. It's meant to be a conversation between colleagues. Yes, has that international protocol that we have to check at your work, but actually it's about helping you as a step ladder in your career. That's the point of it. So that's amazing in terms of surprises. That's brilliant. I just want to drill down a bit, if I can, to the questions themselves. So were these the questions that you expected? I'm going to be interested in this because obviously I had pre-written, I've never told you this, I always pre-write 10 questions before I go in, and then I dealt with Sean, who had also pre-written questions, and we meshed them, right, in the half an hour pre-meeting. So were the questions what you expected? Here we go.
Oh, it's a difficult one to, I had a look over my notes before because I'd forgotten some of the questions completely, but I had written them down. So I had a quick look over and it was a bit like, well, I've written some notes down. I was trying to piece together, is that what they asked? So in some ways they were, especially because, like, I think definitely the expertise of you and my other examiner, Sean, you asked questions about those things that I had like read before of both of your work, but also then it was stuff that I'd referenced as well. So in some ways I thought that was going to come up. And I think so my other examiner, Sean, his expertise is in heritage. And that was something that I had thought about writing about. I'd written a few paragraphs really and ended up cutting out of my thesis. But then I thought, oh, he's definitely going to probe me on that. And I was actually really pleasantly surprised because he did, but he also understood the reasons why I did take that out. And I think he definitely kind of thought there was a rationale behind that. And yes. I felt like I managed to be able to explain that in the exam, which was something that I'd wanted to do, which is to kind of like have that defense of the reasons I've done one thing over another thing. And I think when I first knew about having to do the exam, I'd obviously gone on Google, and again, it's one of those things you probably shouldn't Google because I've had so many of those blogs that are like, here are the 180 questions that might happen when you're doing your exam, and that's incredibly overwhelming. Yes. And also it's never going to be the questions that you get asked because they're about your thesis, not about anybody's thesis. And trying to prepare answers in advance, I got really frustrated with very quickly because I'm not an actress. I can't write something down, read it, and then recite it. So it came across robotic and I missed things out and I got annoyed at myself. So I think I did quickly kind of get my head around that it is going to be a conversation. It is going to be something that you need to listen to the questions and engage with what those questions are. Else, I think you do run the risk of actually just answering whatever you want to answer that doesn't actually answer the question at all. So I do kind of think with the questions, some of them were what I expected in terms of general themes. But again, I was quite pleasantly surprised sometimes with some of the things that were asked of me because I felt like I could answer them in a way that was truthful and that was actually off kind of my own head at the time. So.
Look, brilliant. And we are, just like I said to you in the oral exam, we're now reaching the end of our vlog. We've got our last couple of questions, if I can. And look, I'm going to ask you, I suppose, after you pass so brilliantly, you can't do better than you've done. I mean, that's the point, is you can't do better than you've done. You've got a AA, you've passed without correction. It is the unicorn result. So you are that brilliant, and your career going forward here, we don't know how far you're going to go. You are triumphant. But I wonder, after you pass so brilliantly, what you learnt from the process. And I just want to, if I can, also log the comment you made just as we started the Zoom before the recording started. And that is that, you know, your thesis is investigating class. It is investigating working class culture and how it's managed. And you've said to me, you know, from your sort of background, people from your background don't do a PhD. You're the first person in your family to have done a PhD. I was obviously first in family to do a PhD. And that's precious. That transforms our universities, that knowledge. So I wonder if you can help us. So what you learnt from the process, and maybe how you can help us going forward, particularly for the people that we need to transform our universities, particularly from working class backgrounds.
Oh yeah, I think that is one of the things. Like, it sounds really disingenuous when I say this now, but I genuinely walked into it thinking that I was going to get either a failure or major corrections. And I don't mean that in a way to think that's like, oh, woe is me, but it just genuinely is from that kind of, like, I guess it's that imposter syndrome sort of thing that is coming through. And actually, like, I think sometimes the process of a PhD for some students, and maybe it's students of working class backgrounds, or maybe it's a more broad spectrum of students, it can erode your confidence a little bit, I think, as it goes on with the process, purely because I think there's a lot of people who've been the smartest in their class throughout school and throughout uni, and they suddenly get to doing a PhD, and it's 3 years where it's like, on your own, do some research, here you go. Obviously, I had an absolutely fantastic supervisor who every time I spoke to him would raise my confidence back up again and again and again. But I actually think having an exam that has gone well, it did bring that confidence level a little bit back up almost instantly, because it was kind of like, oh, actually, no, the work I have done is it's okay. it's quite good. So I think there's definitely the kind of trying to, when you're struggling maybe throughout the process, actually when it comes to an end point, it is like it's kind of come full circle. And it's why you wouldn't really want to have students who are kind of going through half the process and then leaving without being able to complete and to have their confidence built back up by completing that kind of PhD. So I think that's definitely something that I learned from the process.
Well, again, you've changed my universe again. I would never have thought of that as an argument for an oral exam, and there's plenty of arguments I've used that actually it rounds out the experience and perhaps refills the well and the confidence at the end of it. So I'm about to ask you a question. You may change thousands of lives in the answer that you're about to give. So #no pressure. What do you recommend to the students? And there will be thousands out there who are about to undergo an oral examination, like you were, was it a month ago? So what would you recommend to those students?
I think it's one thing that I've read before, and I think it does sound cliche, but it really is something that it is true, which is that you have written the thesis, you have done the work, you've done the reading. Nobody does know it better than you do. And actually, you don't need to have all this preparation, say, all of this kind of written down bureaucracy, which is about your work, because it is all stored in your head, and you can talk about that just in a very kind of basic conversational way, and you do know those things. So if you have gone through the process and you genuinely have done it, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to go into an exam and for the most part do well. I think that's one of the things that I'd want to recommend to other students doing the exam. And again, just try and kind of imagine, try and raise that kind of like fake it till you make it of that level of confidence, because after you've done your exam, you'll have made it.
And look, what a great Manchester answer that is. Fake it before you make it. An entire city has changed the world through history through that T-shirt slogan. And look, I do want to finish with you if I can. So you can do just about anything, Amy. And I hope through the oral exam, I was clear about that. And I hope through this remarkable time that we've shared in your late night, my early morning, that I've confirmed that you can do just about anything. And I know you will. So can you tell me a little bit about what you think, what the next steps might be?
Oh, well, one of the things that I think it's really important to talk about, which often doesn't get talked about, is that right now I am concentrating on earning a little bit of money. It's one thing that is out of the conversation a lot of the time when we talk about PhDs and about students, and it is something that we all have to live. And as you transition towards the end of a PhD, even a funded one, that funding runs out at some point. And I think it is important that that's kind of recognised as part of the PhD process. So like at the moment, I'm working at an arts festival in Manchester International Festival, which I've done for 10 years now, which makes me feel very old. But yeah, I've gone back into that and I've been doing some work for them. And I think really, now that I've kind of, as much as I wish I'd have maybe thought about some of these things before, I think now that I've got a little bit of time to think about things, I'm going to try and use that time just for to see about what other opportunities there are out there and what direction I do want to take my kind of PhD into. And I'm hoping that, I think sometimes you're getting told a lot when you're doing your PhD about how you need to do this, 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 and this to be employable, and this, 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 and this. And you just can't always do that. And that's okay if you can't. And it's worth, and you are allowed to have a little bit of time sometimes that you can try and find your way of doing that. So I'm not too sure as of yet, but I am having a lot of big thinks about things.
And look, that's tremendous. And look, as we've talked about, Amy, and obviously you know from all my work, that the notion that, you know, we're in 1987 and after you do a PhD, this is the career trajectory for an academic. That hasn't been true for 25 years. And so we all just stumble along the road, kick the can further down the road and just try and make a living. And I think your commentary there is very, very helpful, and taking a moment to plan for you, not how you should behave, not what other people are telling you an academic should do, because those sort of career narratives, they've been over a really long time, and we're all sort of making do and faking it before we make it, I think. So you are remarkable, and I'm so privileged that our paths have crossed, so privileged. And I was so privileged to be involved in the examination. It is, I think, and I've marked hundreds of PhDs, hundreds of them. It is the best PhD I've ever read. And it was the best oral exam I've ever seen. So,
wow.
So the challenge you've got when you have a Dean of Graduate Research as your examiner, and can I say a lot of people wouldn't have that courage, is that you've got a Dean of Graduate Research who actually really knows PhDs. The gift of it is I can say, of all the things I've seen around the world, you are that spectacular and your research is that important and you are that important. And I think the rest of the world on your late night, my early morning has seen what I've seen and know that you can do just about anything, my darling.
Thank you very much. And it's really kind of you to say, and that's one of the things, one of the reasons that I wanted you as an examiner is that you're generous with your words and with what you do for other PhD students around the globe. So thank you very much for that.
Well, look, we'll let you now. Your next steps are obviously to maybe have a quick wine and go to Betty Buys, or have a little bit of Black Sambuca and go to bed, because it's very, very late for you. But on behalf of Amy and myself, I wish everybody love, light and peace. And thank you for everything that you've done, Amy. You'll change some lives tonight. See you soon.
See you later. Bye.